Hi, I'm Michelle Chalfant, psychotherapist, holistic life coach, and human just like you, learning to navigate life's challenges. With over 25 years experience, I teach people how to get healthy using the adult chair model. The adult chair model is where simple psychology meets grounded spirituality, and it teaches us how to become healthy adults. From anxiety and depression to codependency and relationship issues, you can use the adult chair for just about anything. Each week, I share practical tips, tools, and advice from myself and a wide range of experts on how to get unstuck, how to live authentically, and how to truly love yourself, all while sitting in your adult chair. Welcome to the Adult Chair Podcast. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Adult Chair Podcast. I am Michelle Chalfant. As always, delighted to be here with you today on September 1st. Yep, we are officially in September. And I have a giant announcement. Many of you have been emailing in, and I know people in my membership ask me this on a monthly basis. When is the next live event that you are doing? It is here. It is on the calendar. We have booked it. Yes, indeed. If you're ready to come do some more deep work and really do some personal transformation work, some personal work, come join us in Nashville, Tennessee, November 3rd, 4th, and 5th. We will be doing, I'm going to say this, it's going to be the last Adult Chair 3-day workshop because we're changing things up a lot for next year. So if you're interested, we'd love to have you. It's going to be a good one. Again, November 3rd, 4th, and 5th. The details are at theadultchair.com/Nashville. We would love to see you there. And everybody wants to go to Nashville. So come on, come check it out. We're doing it right close to downtown Nashville. So you'll be able to check out all the things, spend a couple extra days, check out Nashville. It's a hot place to be. I'm even thinking about going back, if you can believe it. I thought about actually moving back there because so much is going on. So anyway, we'd love to have you come join us. All right. So this week on the show, I have Ann Moss Rogers. And the reason I wanted Ann Moss to be on the show is because we start on Sunday, which is September 4th. It's Suicide Prevention Week, and this is an extremely important topic because suicide rates are going up, and I wanted to know why. So she's an expert. She's a suicide expert, and we talked about so many incredible things. Everybody needs to hear this show because you might have someone in your life that is thinking about this. And if not today, at some point in your future, you never know. Maybe it's a coworker, maybe it's your neighbor, maybe it's just someone you can't even imagine. But it would be really great to know the signs. So that's what we talked about today. What are the signs of someone that is contemplating suicide? What do we look for? We talked about her son. She talked all about survivor's guilt. We really went through so many things in this podcast. It's a must listen for anybody. How do you find yourself after your life explodes in your face? I mean, this is what happened to her. And she talked about her whole journey and how she got herself back. So please listen to the show. Please share this show. It is such an important one. Let me talk to you a little bit about Ann Moss, and we're going to jump right into the show. So Ann Moss Rogers is an emotionally naked public speaker. She's a TEDx storyteller, a certified suicide prevention trainer, and the award-winning author of Diary of a Broken Mind. After her 20-year-old son, Charles, died by suicide on June 5th, 2015, Ann Moss chronicled her family's tragedy in a newspaper article that went viral. And her blog, Emotionally Naked, has reached millions of people. Her second book, Emotionally Naked, A Teacher's Guide to Preventing Suicide and Recognizing Students at Risk, with co-writer Dr. Kimberly O'Brien, was published August 24th, 2021. She's been featured in New York Times and was the first non-clinician ever invited to speak to the National Institute of Mental Health on suicide. She's a UNC Chapel Hill alumni Ann Moss currently lives in Richmond, Virginia with her husband, and her surviving son, Richard, is a filmmaker in LA. Here we go with Ann Moss Rogers. So welcome to the Adult Chair podcast, Ann Moss Rogers.
Thank you for having me. I'm so pleased to be here today.
Yeah, me too. I mean, you were already educating me prior to the show about the terminology that is even like important to use around the topic of suicide. So, and I was saying to you also, this is a topic that needs to be discussed, needs to be talked about. And it's one that's uncomfortable for so many people. People would rather sweep it under the carpet or, not notice the signs that are happening. Or again, if you're on the flip side, where you have experienced someone that has died by suicide, there's grief and people don't know what to say to these. There's so much we are going to talk about today. So I'm so grateful to have you on and sharing your wisdom with us.
Absolutely. And I'm pleased that you reached out specifically on this topic, because you know that a lot of people don't want to talk about it, but it is a rising cause of death, especially with our young people. So we definitely want to know those signs.
Yeah. And I would love to, I want to jump right into that, but I feel it's important to honor your story first. So would you share your story? And then I do want to ask that exact question you just brought up.
Sure. So around Charles is always kind of effervescent and fun, and always just this hilarious toddler and kid and teenager. But around the time that he entered high school, I noticed a change. And then he started abusing substances. They call that substance misuse. And he was, drinking and smoking pot. And what I didn't know is that he was doing that to numb or make go away thoughts of suicide that I never knew about. And I'm like, why is he drinking? He told me he wouldn't do that. And, we kind of took this parent thing of, taking away the car keys. Well, of course, at 15, he didn't have car keys. But when he did have car keys, we kind of took this punitive approach and found out real quickly that we were pretty helpless, and that doesn't stop people from, using drugs. Mm-mm. And he wasn't diagnosed with depression until much later. So we would take him to mental health professionals, and I struggled. Well, is it mental illness? Is it substance misuse? And, what's going on? Should I wait till he's addicted before sending him off? Which is all these crazy questions. Mm. And then really nowhere to go to ask those questions. So my husband and I got a counselor, and that's how we, ask those questions. So we went one day, and the counselor says, well, I'm hearing through my network that Charles is, really using a lot of drugs and alcohol and some really scary substances, and I'm in fear for his life. So he recommended that we kidnap our son and take him to a wilderness program. So basically, they wanted us to introduce a new trauma into our son's life in order to save his life, which is a really difficult decision. He goes there, he is not happy. I mean, this is a kid that up until now, roughing it meant going without the whipped cream on his Starbucks iced coffee. So, wasn't into it.
Yeah.
And every picture was angry and upset. So anyway, he gets through that program. That's where we finally get a diagnosis of depression, which shocked me because he was always so funny and hilarious. So I wasn't seeing it, but I did believe it. He goes from there to therapeutic boarding school, another step we could not afford, but our home equity loan could. He goes to the therapeutic boarding school and comes back around 2014, having spent some 22 months outside our home in some kind of placement. apparently it is not long after he gets home. I'm thinking, oh, he's going to use some of those coping skills he learned to use while he was away. But he went back to using drugs and alcohol.
So he wasn't using them at the school and
No,
obviously in the
no.
outdoor. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
I mean, the second boarding school he went to, because he went to more than one,
Mhm.
not Plan A, he was actually kicked out for a drug infraction.
Oh, wow. Okay.
He
Okay.
ended up graduating online,
Okay.
but they loved him and he was enormously popular, and they figured out a way for him to graduate online.
Mhm.
So we were thankful that at least, this was 2 weeks before graduation. I was
Oh my
like
gosh.
waiting for that proud mama moment, and it just blew up in my face. So he graduates, he ends up getting addicted to heroin.
Oh gosh.
He, goes to detox, he goes to rehab, and he goes to a recovery house and he relapses. And they take him back to detox and he walks out, and for 2 weeks, we don't know where he is. And then we get a call, and it's the police, and they tell us they're going to meet us in the parking lot because we're out to dinner. They called my husband's cell phone. I don't even know how they got that number to this day. We go out. As soon as I get in the back seat, my husband got out there pretty quickly. They immediately tell us, your son has been found dead this morning. And
Oh my God.
the noise in my ear, I can't even describe the emotional pain of those words. And just a couple of minutes after that, my husband said, well, how did he die? And I'm like, that's a crazy question. He died, he had to have died of overdose, meaning,
Yeah, for
you know,
sure. Yeah.
heroin. And the policeman said it was a suicide and the method left no question. And that was like this extra twist to the knife. And my first thought is, how could I be such a crummy mother that my child would check out on me? Didn't he know we loved him?
Mm.
And it would be a long time before I would really understand that our love isn't what prevents suicide. There are a lot of things we can do to prevent it, but thinking that my child would never do that, or my husband will never do that because he loved me. They don't leave because they don't love you or feel like you love it. They leave because they are in pain and a place of deep despair. So it's really that they're not making a choice, but rather that they are kind of pushed towards suicide based on underlying issues like depression or trauma or things that have happened in their psychosocial world. So usually a constellation of issues that kind of happen all at once. And then, I would run into people and they wouldn't let me talk about Charles. I mean, I would start talking about him and then they would change the subject, and I would try again and they would change the subject. And I remember at one event that I went to that, it was a monthly event. We all got together in the neighborhood. And I started talking about it. I kept getting cut off. And finally, I just stood up in the middle of the game and I said, I have to go. And I just walked out. I was furious. I mean, I was so frustrated. I felt so isolated and alone, and I wanted to talk about him. And I'm like, I just need 2 or 3 minutes.
Yeah.
But it made people uncomfortable.
Mm.
And there was a lot of fear. And I think they felt like, well, we need to keep her mind off of it. Well, that's all I could think about. I mean,
Yeah.
that's what's on my mind. So it is really hard for a lot of humans to walk in and sit with someone in their tragedy. And I did learn the amount of fear that I'm going to say the wrong thing, I'm going to do the wrong thing.
Yeah.
And that maybe parents who've lost someone needs to have that conversation with a close friend and say, this is what I need. And then that friend can communicate it to everyone else because everyone's different. But it was though it was such a journey of pure agony, and I didn't think I could survive it.
I'm sure. I'm I can't even, like, I'm listening to your story. Wow. Wow.
It was, I mean, every single day, probably for the first 2 years,
Mm-hmm.
just getting out of bed was a monumental task that was, felt like it's celebration. I've gotten out of bed,
Yeah.
but I kept pushing forward.
Mm-hmm.
And I had these little mantras that I would, you know, tell myself. And mine was, I will survive. I don't know how. I don't know what this looks like. Other people have done it. And as bad as it hurts right now, it will never hurt as much as getting the news. That part is over, and it will never hurt that much again. So if I was able to endure the pain of hearing that in that back seat of the police car, I can endure the pain now.
Wow. Uh, so this has been since 2015, and here we are in 2022. How are you today?
I'm good. I have a whole toolbox that
Mm.
I use. And of course, when you're grieving, it's not like you ever get over to get past it. Time removes its fangs. So at first it feels sharp and jagged and you want to push it away. And I would never recommend anybody to push it away. You've got to go through it. You have to feel that pain. You have to feel to heal.
Oh, I say that all the time. I can't believe you just said that.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite sayings. I say,
Yes.
oh, I get it back in feedback forms all the time.
All the time. You cannot push pain away. You have to go straight into it to heal it. You have to feel it.
You can manage it,
Yep.
you can lessen your suffering, but you cannot numb it or make it go away. Because I've noticed and still talk to people who did a lot of alcohol, a glass of wine, and became alcoholics as a result. And then they'll tell me, well, it took me 3 years to get through my substance use disorder. And then once I tackled that, I had to start the grieving process all over again. And it was just as fresh and new and ugly and raw as the first day.
Wow.
So if you push it away, it'll come back like a boomerang on steroids.
Yeah, it does. I agree.
And those really intense feelings of agony last 60 to 90 seconds. And you can tell yourself that too. There's all sorts of things you can tell yourself. And I told you the one I told earlier. Sometimes I'd say it's because I loved him so much that I feel this pain now. This pain is love. So sometimes that helps. And sometimes just saying it's just 60 to 90 seconds. I can do this. And when it lifts, I'm allowed to go distract myself because I've let it in.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sitting with it for the time it needs to be with me.
Mm-hmm.
But when it lifts, I need to go do something else. So I don't allow it to sort of refire, and go in this coulda, woulda, shoulda thing and make it, more painful. I didn't need it to be more painful.
You know what I'm hearing you say, Ann Moss, is that you were using conscious self-talk versus unconscious self-talk, living in stories, letting the thoughts come through that keep you stuck, keep you down. You were choosing your thoughts consciously and saying to yourself things like, the pain I feel today will never be as awful as the pain the day that I heard that he had died. So I like this because it's empowering in a way, because people don't know to do this. We sit in grief, and I've talked a lot about grief on this show. And number one, we don't know how to feel our pain well. Number two, we get lost in that story. We just go, it's like a broken record of now they're gone and this is awful and I'm never going to be, it's not going to be the same. It's like we keep ourselves stuck in a way and we torture ourselves.
Yeah.
It's
And
torture.
of course, suicide, because it's in a death with intent,
Yeah.
That intentional, they took their life, it must be because I'm a terrible person, a bad parent, not loving enough, I missed the signs. We go through this extra little, and I'll never say it hurts more to lose a child to suicide versus a heart failure, because
Hmm.
it can't hurt more.
Yeah.
But there is this additional complexity that we really struggle with, is all those coulda, woulda, shouldas. And I put boundaries around it
Hmm.
because I was torturing myself to the point that it was just nuts. And the first thing I did was I told myself, all right, you have 10 minutes a day. You can torture yourself for 10 minutes a day. You have at it. But after that 10 minutes is up, you've got to go do something else. And if it comes back later in the day, you say, nope, already tortured myself today. Tomorrow, you can torture yourself all over again. But
Wow.
today, you're done. So
Wow.
by helping myself put boundaries around it, it really helped me kind of get it under control and kind of stay in the present and not, you can start to catastrophize or look in the past and see what you missed. And I used all the strategies that you talk about on this show. And
Hmm.
I didn't know to use them. I just figured them out.
Yep.
And, writing really helped me. I've 2 books, 3,600 blog posts, probably 100 articles. Really, writing has helped me just so much work through all this agony.
Yeah. Wow. What a story. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you. Something that we were talking about right in the beginning of the show was the first of all, what's happening with suicide? Because it seems to me, and I don't know if it's because we have social media and the internet now, or or is it the same? What are the statistics on suicide? Are you finding that it's on the rise? Is it the same? Is it going down? What do you find in your study and your research?
So we know that up until like 2019, it was kind of a steady incline. So
Mhm.
all other diseases like cancer and heart disease are the slow, steady downward. And suicide's really the only cause of death that's steadily going up.
Mm.
The pandemic, we had a drop. And then, or in 2020. Now, we don't really have a lot of 2022 statistics, but we do know that teenagers, over almost 19% of them seriously considered suicide during the pandemic.
Mm.
And we had more people go to the emergency room, and we're having more people reach out for help.
Mhm.
So what we're seeing, it looks like a trend in some, communities of a rise in suicide in young people and a slight drop for people over 45.
Interesting. So, do we know why that is? What's the research say about that?
We don't really know yet. I mean,
Mm.
a lot of people are talking about it and are writing things about it. I'm like, that's not substantiated yet. So,
Mhm. Mhm.
we don't want to make everything sound hopeless. I mean, the last thing we want to do is write a headline that said suicides is skyrocketing,
Mhm.
because you're basically putting out a headline of hopelessness. Well, I might as well go. Everybody else is checking out.
Yeah.
And we want to hesitate. We don't want to sensationalize this. So we
Mhm.
don't, I know that young African Americans, like 10-year-olds, the rate of suicide is risen
Oh no.
significantly. And of course, we know that access to the internet, I mean, they can look up how to die, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I have a lot of those statistics because I do a lot of that work of writing blog posts that they find when they do a Google search, because
Mm.
I'm really
Mm.
good at
Mhm.
making sure I rank really high for certain phrases.
Got it.
So a lot of people will reach out to me
Mm-hmm.
because they were looking up a way to die, or how to write a note, or how do I tell someone I want to kill myself? Because I actually have a blog post. This is how do I tell someone I want to kill myself?
Wow.
I mean, we just say call a hotline or go to a
Right,
therapist.
right. And what are the chances of someone that's about to kill themselves? What are the chances they're going to call a hotline?
Well, actually,
Are
pretty good.
they
I
pretty
mean,
good? I'm so glad to hear that because I would guess it would not be very high, but I'm thrilled to hear that actually.
and that's why the hotlines are, unfortunately, are on hold on a lot
Mm,
of them, because they just don't have the personnel to fill all the seats in order to take those calls.
ugh.
The text lines have really helped a lot, and people are able to triage those a little more easily. um so I've got a lot of resources on those pages, so sometimes they click the hotline. So over the years, I've figured out what resources are popular and which ones aren't.
Mm-hmm.
They love to see what a safety plan looks like. So I have one that's filled out and one that's empty, so they can download it if they want to, or see one that's already done. So they can figure out, okay, why hasn't my therapist done this with me?
Yeah.
And I have ones that you can do yourself. Like if you write this and this and this on an index card, what connects you to life? Write that on an index card. What are the most important things for you? And when you get to that really stressful point, pull that out. And lots of times it won't make it go away, but it'll connect you back to life and remind you of what's important and what things you don't want to leave behind.
Mm. So what about people that are sitting or not sitting, but that know someone? Like, what are the signs to look for with someone that might be thinking about suicide? What are we looking for?
So real sudden change in personality, or even kind of a gradual change in personality. They'll say things like, I can't do this anymore.
Mm,
I don't want to live. They may
mhm,
be really preoccupied about talking about death. They may be giving away prized possessions, like, I really want you to have my prized book collection. Why? It
mhm.
means so much to you. I don't need it anymore. Well, they're giving that to you because they're maybe planning to check out, but that's also an invitation. All these comments, they're fishing, and they're wanting to tell you, but they're just kind of putting their toe in the water to see how the comment will be received. And lots of times we just miss it because, Michelle, they're pretty vague, right?
Yeah.
But there is this feeling you get when somebody says, I can't do this anymore. And there's that feeling of despair that you get, and you've got to go with your gut. Um, People will say, I feel so overwhelmed. I feel so worthless. Um, we need a lot of people understanding what people say or their behavior, because it's very individual too.
Mhm, mhm.
Some of the behaviors are an escalation of drinking and drugging. Um, Either a sudden change in being very depressed, or sudden change from I've been depressed a long time and all of a sudden they're super happy. And you're like, oh, my friend's great. They're happy. Lots of times that means they've set a date to suicide.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Messages on social media. My son wrote, if I died, no one would notice for 30 days. That was an invitation
That
for,
was on social media?
it's on Facebook.
Wow.
So I also, when I speak about youth suicide, I show them different posts youth have put up when they're thinking about suicide. But, Michelle, I spot it so quickly now, and somebody will say, oh, I love all you. You all mean so much. And I'm like, that sounds like a goodbye letter. And I'm like, I'm on
Mm.
it. I'm like, tell me what's going on. Let's connect. with private message and you let me know, what's going on, and are you thinking of suicide? Because that's the question we need to ask.
Yeah. And I like that. So be very direct. You would recommend then, if someone is listening or seeing signs, for them to say, are you thinking about suicide?
Right. And what you will typically see with the person you've asked, if you are face to face, is relief.
Mm,
So, if you're texting, you may, oh, they're not answering. Will they be offended? I'd rather somebody be mad at me than dead. And you can also kind of pull in things like, well, I just noticed that the last two events I've had at the house, you haven't been here and you've always been life of the party. I suspect something is not right.
mhm,
And I'd like to talk about it. And then you can listen with empathy. You
mhm,
don't want, I always say, listen more and lecture less.
mhm.
Don't try to fix it. It's not your job. Your job is to listen with empathy. And let me tell you, allowing another person to feel heard is the absolute greatest gift you can give to another human. It really is.
You're quoting me.
Do you say the same
I
thing?
said the same I say that. Yes.
You are so smart.
I think you are so smart too, Ann Moss. I'm listening to you, and I'm gonna say that in high school, I was someone that was very depressed, but nobody knew it.
Right.
Nobody knew it. I had a boyfriend, I dressed well, I had friends. Nobody knew it. On the inside, very depressed. And I had thoughts of suicide. And this is in the 80s. So again, no internet, no, not, there was not a therapist, or there was no such thing probably as a life coach, but there's no therapist on every corner. It was like the mental health clinic, and that was it. I
Right.
think, I mean, or a psychiatrist. Like, it wasn't like it is now. But I remember leaving, I would write letters to God, and I would leave them out on my desk at home. And I would say things and long letter. I'm a writer too, like you, Ann Moss. And I would write and write letters to God. And I would say, I want to come join you. I don't like it down here. I don't want to be here. And I leave them on my desk in hopes that my parents would find them, right? Like I'm talking like big letters on the desk, like not in an envelope, desk, paper and pen right there.
I can't tell you the number of kids that told me that very story.
And I'm thinking, and I'm glad to hear this, because I hope today's parents would say something like, what's going on?
Yeah.
And I'm thinking back, I honestly cannot remember anyone sitting down. My mom might have said at one point, like, what are those letters about? But, again, nobody knows what to say.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and I'm thinking, and I remember feeling, God, I need someone to help me out of this pain I'm in. I'm in so much pain. I had such unbelievable negative self-talk, self-hatred all the time. And it was like my way out. I thought, I don't know how else to end this. I'm in so much emotional pain. But again, I was the one dressing up and going out on the weekend. So no, it didn't fit. Like, I'm writing these letters, right? But yet I'm going out. Anyway, I'm not going to get into my whole story, but that was like a probably junior and senior in high school. And then in college, coming home, crying like at the drop of a hat, and that nobody knew why. And my mom finally said, I think you should go to a psychiatrist. And I said, I think that's a good idea. I just wanted to talk to somebody, right? I wanted someone to hear me, and for me to say, this is how I'm feeling. Can you help me? And, and we had this Italian family, and my dad would say, why do you want to air your dirty laundry to strangers? You know, and
Right.
and I think some people still say that, but back then that was how I grew up. Thank God. Obviously, I'm still here. I did a lot of what you are talking about with your thoughts about the death of your son. I had to do that with my own personal thoughts.
Right.
And I learned a lot about, self-love and all the things. But anyway, thank God, I'm here today, and now I can talk about this. But the point of today's show is, what are the other signs? So you're saying even other kids are doing that today. They're leaving letters like
They're
I
leaving
did for
letters.
God. Yeah.
I've had kids say, I've been searching on the internet, and I know my parents look at my searches, but they must not love me because they've not said anything to me.
Yeah.
those are called the invitations.
Yeah.
Those are invitations for you to ask the question because they're afraid to do it. They want to tell.
Yes. And looking back at me when I was 18 years old,
Yeah.
I wanted to tell someone.
Desperately.
Yes, desperately. I wanted someone to connect with me and say, "Are you okay?" And then I could say to them, "No, I'm in so much pain. Please help me." And nobody flat out asked me that question. So if you're listening to the show today and you know of somebody that's leaving letters, that's verbally giving you signs, or like you were saying, and Moss, when you were saying they're giving things away, please have that conversation with them.
Right.
Have the conversation.
Remember, you don't have to fix it.
Nope.
And your job is to listen and
Yeah.
then try to figure out what that next step is. And you may not know, so you may call the hotline and go, we are here together. I
Yeah.
don't know what the next step is. Here's my situation. You don't have to be an expert with that part of it.
Yeah.
A friend of mine, since the death of her son by suicide, struggles with thoughts of suicide. She's never had it in her whole life.
Mm-hmm.
And so what she does is when she starts to struggle, she calls a group of friends and she says, or she texts them, and she has 8. Can one of you come over and spend the night? Or she'll go over to their house. And that's worked out real well for her.
Yeah. Yeah. That's beautiful. And speaking of letting them speak, I just want to shift to, if you're someone that has lost somebody, and like you said, it doesn't matter if it's by suicide or death of cancer, or like you said, heart disease or whatever. I remember, and unfortunately, I've had friends, numerous friends, that have lost their children, not by suicide. I do know a few by suicide, but others have been by different cancers and things of that, like that. And I know, going through this with them, they've all said, I just want to be able to keep talking about them.
Right.
So it was interesting when you were saying you're at the party and your friends would just not let you speak. And they said, I'm thinking of one friend in my mind right now. And she said, "Please don't let his memory die. Will you always remember him?" And I said, "I will always remember him.
Yeah.
Don't worry."
One of the first questions I'll ask is, like, if there's anybody, is what made so-and-so special?
Yeah.
I want to know this person that they lost and what they meant to them.
Yeah.
And that's what deepens relationships. So if you run away from having that conversation, sit with your fear and work through your fear, and just decide, this is going to be uncomfortable. I'm going over to Lynn's house. It's going to be uncomfortable, but I'm going to figure out what she needs. And I'm going to tell her that I'm very awkward. I don't know how to do this, but I'm trying to figure out what I can do for you. And I may ask some really stupid questions. I may say some really stupid things, but I'm here. And if you want to sit around and watch rom-coms and eat popcorn, I'm good. If you want to go through pictures of your son you lost, I'm good with that. I can sit with you in your tragedy.
Yes.
It's really, really hard to do that without fixing it. Why don't you do this? And why don't you do that?
Oh, that's such a turnoff. I know that's the feeling. It's like, no. And I suggest the same exact thing to people, like, be open and honest and vulnerable. If you don't know what to say, then you walk up. I remember, and when you said that, I can remember a client saying to me, "I don't know what to say to so-and-so. They just lost their brother." And I said, you go up to them and you say, "I don't know what to say to you. Can you help me? I want to be here for you."
Right.
We cannot fix it.
We can't. There's no way you can fix it. And I always tell people, do something more intentional.
Yes.
Take a meal.
Yeah.
I've got that little thing that it's Grief Journey in a Jar. And print them out, you cut them up, and they're just little sayings. And I've got one for general grief, and I have one for a loss of a child to any cause of death. And it just allows you kind of to pull something out of the bag every day and be reminded of the friend that gave this to you. they cared
Mm.
enough to cut up all these little things and put them in a jar or a bag or whatever and bring it over to you because they thought it was more thoughtful
Mm.
than than a drugstore card.
I love that.
And then I've got some worksheets that are part of an ebook, coping strategies for grief and loss. So that, here are the things that are going to be painful. Like if you've lost a child, how many children do you have? How are you going to answer that question?
Mm-hmm.
And knowing that no answer is wrong, and knowing that you might answer this different at a family gathering than you would at work. And
Yeah.
that's okay. But just think about it a little bit ahead of time, because when you're in the moment, if you haven't thought about some of these things in the worksheet, then you'll be like, there's kind of a bigger grief relapse.
Yeah. Makes so much sense. This is such great advice. Do you ever find that with suicide that there aren't signs? Or do you find there, again, I know there's not an always and never, but would you say that there most of the time there are signs?
86% of those who
Wow.
die by suicide let their intentions know in some way. Now,
With the closest people to them or friend, like, is it usually the same people?
it's usually the people closest to them or people that they see every day. And
Mm,
sometimes it's a stranger. So it's not always a letter but it's a search. Usually they want to tell someone. So,
mm-hmm.
and I didn't realize how badly somebody wanted to tell when they're suicidal. And
Mm-hmm.
I wrote something on my blog and I posted it on Facebook, and this young lady clicked through and she ends up sending me a message that says 2 days ago I thought about taking my life. But reading this post from a mother who's felt such devastating pain has changed my perspective on life. And I was like, holy cow, that's why I wrote this. I didn't even know that's why I
Wow.
wrote this until she sent me that
Wow.
message.
Oh,
That was the first time I recognized that people who struggle with those thoughts are dying to tell someone. And so she reached out to her own parents and she asked for help. And that was kind of this big turning point for me. And I went to every overnight walk from American Foundation of Suicide Prevention, of every Out of the Darkness walk. And I got with people who had struggled and survived a suicide attempt. And they told me their beautiful stories. And that's where I started to learn and understand the most about suicide, is from the people who had felt those feelings, like the story you talked about earlier.
yeah.
That cry for help,
Yeah.
leaving letters out, and you had your own way of communicating it. And it takes knowing that person, because 90% of those who struggle with suicide, they're going to tell us. They're not going to tell the mental health professionals.
Right.
They
Right.
tell us. And we can't say things like, well, you're just trying to get attention. Well, of course they're trying to get attention. How else do you get help? Smoke.
Exactly. Exactly. You helped me with a term, and I want to let everybody know this because there's a new that we don't want to use the term somebody committed suicide. We want to now use the term, you said died by suicide, or what were the other ones that?
Killed himself, died by suicide, ended his life, or suicided as a verb.
Okay. Okay.
So, and the origin of that is around 1400s England. It was a crime. And
Oh,
so, and it was punishable in a court of law.
really?
So after the person had
Wow.
died, you're like, well, how can can't put them in jail then, right? They would hold the family accountable, and they would deny them a service. They would deny them the burial in the cemetery. They would do a lot of other ugly, nasty, mean, awful things. And then they would deny the family their inheritance. So evolved today, and we know it as a public health issue. and
Yeah.
it is not a crime. And it may be on the books as a crime in some states, but it has no statutes. So there is no state in the United States that you can actually, be punished for attempting suicide, like, because we've recognized the science.
Wow. Okay. I didn't know that. That's interesting.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's
And
been a
it makes sense when you say that. Like, oh yes, of course. That makes sense now why we wouldn't want to use that term anymore. Thank you. Um, what else can you share with us? Is there something that I might have missed that would be important for people that are listening?
well, I think we need to pay attention to social media messages.
Mhm.
And I think we need to just really focus on connection.
Mhm.
So building any kind of foundation for connection, having the family over, somebody doesn't show up. When somebody's ghosting you, reach out and
Mhm.
don't give up. So I had a relative, I won't name which one, and she was struggling. And for 6 months, I kept texting her over and over.
Mhm.
I love you. I'm so proud of you. I'm here if you need to talk.
Mhm.
Got no answer. She was reading them though.
Mm.
6 months later, I get a phone call from her, and she's kind of in a good place. And she said, I got all your texts. And of course,
Wow.
they went unanswered for 6 months, but I kept at it. I was persistent.
Wow.
I figured she was reading them, and she was. She just wasn't in a place to answer them. But she said, I really appreciate that you didn't give up on me.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Thank
So,
God you did that for her.
if you're in
Yeah.
a toxic relationship, that's you may not, that's a whole nother story. But it is a relationship you feel like something has happened, somebody's going through divorce,
Mhm.
um, some major life transition or relationship disruption, a move.
Mhm.
Um, Sometimes those are triggers
Yeah.
to feeling that despair. And
Yeah.
do things in your household if you have young people, like get rid of your Tylenol and
Mm.
buy Advil instead, because
Mhm.
sometimes people in suicidal thought will grab the Tylenol and it causes liver damage, and it can cause a death by overdose. So,
Mm.
but if you have Advil, it's not going to have the same effect.
Yeah. 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 I agree.
And
What,
then firearms,
oh,
firearms,
yeah.
big
Yeah.
argument right now.
Yeah. That's a whole other conversation we could have here. Yeah. Yeah. They're too easily accessible, I should say. What I'm hearing you say, which is so important though, is to have the tough conversations, have those conversations. And if you're uncomfortable, do it anyway.
Yeah,
Ask the questions. Are you okay? Is it okay to ask directly? Are you thinking about taking your life?
yeah, absolutely.
Like
Yeah.
ask, just
Say,
come right out and ask it. Yeah.
are you thinking about suicide?
Yeah.
Is
Versus like, are you depressed or are you no, like come right out and ask the
you
hard
can
questions,
start there.
Yeah.
Then when you finally ask that question, you can say, well, a lot of times when people are going through a divorce and they say things like, I don't want to be here anymore, they're thinking of suicide.
Mm-hmm.
Are you thinking of suicide? So
Mm.
you can put some context around it. I mean, you don't have
Yeah.
to remember every myriad of every detail. You can remember one thing, but you feel that despair when
Yeah.
somebody is struggling.
And then if somebody says, actually, I have been thinking about suicide, can you give us a response? What would we say next?
Tell me more.
Yeah. And just be present and listen.
Yeah.
And I think if we can not or take this home, we cannot fix that person. It's not about fixing, it's about listening and being with, just being someone that sits with presence and hears someone else share what's going on is all you need to do. That's
Well,
it.
and sometimes if you're sitting with somebody who's in an actual suicide episode, they're really consumed with the idea of they're worthless. So you are so tempted to say you
Yeah.
have so much to live for. Do not say that.
No.
How long have you felt this way? How are you thinking of ending your life? So one friend of mine, he was having lunch and the guy admitted that in his barn he'd set up a sort of suicide thing for him to, and I won't talk about
Yeah.
specifically what it
Yeah.
was. And he told this friend, he goes, well, we're going to end lunch right now and we're going to go to your barn and we're going to dismantle all of that right now.
Wow.
So the whole time my friend said they were talking about football and baseball and just all the stuff guys talk about
Mhm.
as they're dismantling what he had planned to use later to kill himself.
Wow. Wow.
So it's okay to ask. They may not tell you, but it's
Yeah.
okay to ask, how are you thinking of ending your life? Because that gives you a clue to kind of go back and remove that from the house to keep them safe from suicide.
Yeah. You know, one final question, if I might ask you this final question, I'm thinking about your son, and I personally have known parents that are in your shoes, okay, and that have had children that were depressed, got into drugs and drinking. Like I'm thinking of so many high schoolers who
Yeah.
didn't do that. I was doing that. Who didn't do that? My
Right.
kids did that, right? How did you know that he was depressed? Did he tell you, or was it the therapist that told you? I think you said the therapist told you, but did you know before the therapist even told you?
A teacher mentioned it. He may
She
be depressed.
did.
So
Okay.
I went to the counselor we were seeing and I said, I'd like to get a diagnosis for my son. I should have asked, I want a psychological evaluation and I won't take no for an answer, but I
Yeah.
did not.
Okay.
So he said, oh, Charles is not depressed. All depressed
Mhm.
kids ask for help,
Mhm.
open and shut. I didn't get a diagnosis or a psychological evaluation until we paid 32,000 for him to go to the wilderness program, and they did one there as part of $32,000 we paid.
Oh my gosh.
There went my kitchen renovation. I had saved
Yeah.
for like 10 years.
Oh my gosh. But I even know parents that have sent their children to the wilderness. I mean, I'm listening to your story. I'm like, boy, do I know, a lot of. So if someone's listening to this and they have teenagers, what can they do? So push to go get a psych eval.
A psychological evaluation. You've got to get support for yourself. Parents never want to do that. They're sure there's a magic
Yeah.
bullet. They're sure they can fix it.
Yep.
I am just not telling them the secret formula. And if they keep digging, they'll find it. They are too entrenched and they're not, they need to learn how to communicate. And by going to a support group one time, they can get more information and then they have this group they can fall back on.
Mm.
I talk a lot about what I did right and what I did wrong
Mhm.
in my first book, Diary of a Broken Mind. And by the time this airs, we will have ordered additional copies because it did sell out. So that's good.
Wow. Okay. Okay.
But it talks about our whole journey. And most of the parents who have children who are in active mental illness, addiction, or both have told me that book really helps. And that is really, I wrote it for that audience and for somebody who's lost someone,
You know,
because both of them had that kind of message.
I mean, I hear about kids of today that are, oh my goodness, the cutting, the drinking, the whatever, and it's like, at what point, like, how do you know when to say, okay, now we need a psych eval? Like, at what point, if a parent's listening to this right now and they're thinking, how do I know? Like, at what point do you get that psych eval? Is it when they're cutting? Is it when they're drinking? Because tons of kids are out drinking in high school. What are the signs?
So self-harm is definitely way over the line.
Yeah.
And it's a way for them to tangibly feel their pain.
Yeah.
Okay, I cut myself, it's bleeding. I understand pain, I understand blood.
Yeah.
I don't get all this pain in my head. So by cutting, I am now seeing it physically, and I get that. And there's
Yeah.
relief and this kind of excitement and this novelty that goes with that behavior. And then it becomes a, a behavior, and it's
Mm,
called non-suicidal self-injury.
hmm.
So it's not that they're trying to kill themselves necessarily, they're just trying to cope. All these are the result of really having underdeveloped coping skills.
Okay.
So I'm
Okay.
always encouraging both schools and parents to ask more questions and to develop a relationship where they're telling a little bit about themselves, because you can't come into your teenager and start asking them a lot of questions and expect that they're just going to like tell you
They
everything.
don't. Yeah, no. They shut down further when you go ask a teenager typically,
Right.
yeah, they're not going to speak.
But if I come home and I say, oh my God, blew up at a coworker, I am so embarrassed.
Mhm.
What do you think I should do in that case?
Yeah.
Listen to them and,
Yeah.
start to ask them questions to spur that critical thinking.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
have an
I
ebook
like
for
that.
that too called
Okay, good. I want to link all of your resources here. So you've given us so much great information. Ann Moss, thank you, thank you, thank you for being on the show today. Thank you. And again, my heart, I mean, looking at your son right here, I'm so sorry. And thank you for the work you're doing. We needed this today. I appreciate it. Where would people find you?
emotionallynaked.com
Okay.
is my blog, and then annmossrogers.com is my speaking site.
Okay. Perfect. I've got this. We're gonna put all this in the show notes, and absolutely yes. Thank you. All right, dear. Thanks so much for being on today, and this was good. All right, everybody. I hope that you reaped a lot of benefits from the show today. Ann Moss is an expert in suicide. So again, please share the show. I really feel like everyone needs to hear this show. We all need to know what the signs are so we know what to do. We've got to stop the suicide rate in our world. It is going up and we need to bring it down. Okay, so on a lighter note, again, do not forget November 3rd, 4th, and 5th, we are doing a live adult chair event. And I have to tell you, it's a lot more than just adult chair. We do a lot of personal work in those 3 days and over the course of those 3 days. So come and join us. We have so much fun, but we do a lot of personal work too. So we always have a lot of Kleenex, not going to lie. But for more details on that, go to theadultchair.com/Nashville, and we will see you in Nashville, Tennessee, right before my birthday. It's a great way to celebrate with me. So come join us. All right, you guys, have a beautiful rest of your week. Love you all. And don't forget, stay this week seated with me right here in your adult chair.